Hey there! Today on Big L Books, I wanted to make a video looking back on my year of reading in 2018 and trying to reflect on how I've changed or grown as a reader this year. Basically, I am not ready to finalize my list of the best books that I've read this year. I guess I'm kind of optimistic and I'm always hoping that a new favorite will pop up in the last 4 days of the year or something. So I'm not ready to talk about specific books, but I wanted to look at a larger picture and just talk about some of the general trends that I noticed with my reading this year. Part of this list will be about my bookish discoveries or the ways that I tried to grow as a reader by experiencing new things. And the other part of this list will be about some interests that I already had going into 2018 that I decided to develop in further depth through my reading. So that's what this video is going to be about, and I hope that you'll enjoy it. To start off, the most major change that I made as a reader this year was to immerse myself into the world of comics and graphic novels. So I'm not sure why 2018 was that year for me. I had previously read some really excellent graphic novels and memoirs before. I knew it was a genre that I was interested in and that I would love, but for some reason this year it just really clicked for me and I just consistently was reading graphic texts throughout the whole year, which was so much fun. So I think part of the reason why I became so interested in this genre was after reading Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. This itself is a graphic text that breaks down in detail what comics are and how they function and why it's a really unique form of art. So it really talks about what comics can do that other media cannot. So reading this book just really ignited the interest in me, and I just went from there reading so many graphic works this year. There were so many comics that I enjoyed reading this year that I can't even list them all, but I just enjoyed reading a wide range of things. So I enjoyed the kind of simple 6-panel comic strips of Kate Beaton in her hilarious collection called Hark a Vagrant. But then I also enjoyed the longer, more serious and immersive graphic novels, such as My Favorite Thing is Monsters by Emile Ferris, where you have these gorgeous illustrations and these like very in-depth stories. And then I also got into a few different series as well. So I really enjoyed working my way through Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. And also, I had the best March break this year reading the entire collected series Bone by Jeff Smith. So all in all, I just had such a fun time trying out all these different types of comics and graphic novels. So that was the best change that I made as a reader, and I really hope to keep this up in 2019. Another genre that I unexpectedly became obsessed with in 2018 was the world of Norse mythology. So my family is from Finland, so I have already read and absolutely love the Kalevala, which is the text where a lot of Finnish mythology comes from. But I wanted to learn a bit more about the rest of Scandinavia and learn some more about the old Viking gods. So I picked up the Poetic Edda right at the start of the year. It was one of the first books that I read this year, and this absolutely blew me away, which is weird because it's just like very fragmented poetry. We know so little about Norse mythology, so it's very cryptic at times, but I was just so entranced with this world, with these weird gods and all the strange things that were happening to them. I don't know what it was about Norse mythology that just pulled me in. There's something so intense about this vision of the world that is surrounded by ice and fire. It was just so intense and I loved it, and it will definitely be something that I continue to explore in 2019, especially as I've just started reading the Sagas of the Icelanders, which is a big beast of a book that is looking at the myths from the Viking Age. So less about the old gods and more about the first settlers of Iceland and what they got up to. So really looking forward to exploring that more. Another genre that kept me busy with reading new things was existential philosophy. So I was familiar with the term existentialism, I had a vague understanding of it, and I know that I've read works that could be classified as existentialist. So it was really when I read this nonfiction book at the Existentialist Cafe that I had a more in-depth understanding of what the movement really means, since this book is a good background about the philosophies that inspired this style of thinking and some of the key philosophers who developed this way of thinking. in the 20th century. So I just became quite interested with these ideas and applying them to my own life. And honestly, existentialism was not quite as depressing as I had always imagined it before. I really thought that it was like this bleak way of looking at the world, but I don't quite feel that same way anymore now that I've studied it in more detail. Of course, I'm only at the beginning of my journey. There's a lot more reading to do for sure. Reading that book finally gave me the courage to start reading The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir. I initially picked up this book because it's a feminist text, but I really enjoyed reading it on an existential level, and Simone de Beauvoir was definitely my girl crush of the year. I'm so fascinated with her, and I know that I'm going to go on to read a lot more of her works in 2019, so that is an exciting little literary friendship that I have going on. And then, of course, because I read Simone, I thought I had to try Jean-Paul Sartre as well, so I read one of his novels, Nausea, which was quite the experience, and I'm looking forward to trying more of his nonfiction as well. I actually went to a ballet recently based on Being and Nothingness, so it was quite a moving piece of work, and I hadn't read the book, so I don't really know what ideas they were trying to convey, but I'm excited to explore this work in more depth, although who knows how long it will take me to make it through this long and dense work of philosophy. Although I do have to say that that's one of my best changes as a reader this year, because I've always been interested in philosophy, but I've found it very intimidating, especially since it's not a subject that I've studied before, so I don't really know how you're supposed to read philosophy. So I'm glad that in 2018 I finally just kind of gave it a try and got into it, whether I really know what I'm doing or not. So I do hope that I will continue to explore other types of philosophy as well in the coming years. Moving over from France to England, I weirdly read a lot of Shakespeare this year, and that was not in my plans at all. It just kind of happened. In the summer, I thought it would be fun to read A Midsummer Night's Dream around the summertime, and I just then started reading a Shakespeare play every week on my balcony, and I had such a fun time doing that. So for Shakespeare plays, I actually got to see 3 plays performed live this year. I saw The Tempest, I saw Coriolanus, and I also saw Julius Caesar. So that was pretty cool. And then I also got to teach Romeo and Juliet again this year. This is like my curse in life. This is the only play that I ever get to teach for some reason. And I also got to teach this to my English as a second language class this year as well, which was a lot of fun, trying to find ways to make Shakespeare as approachable and fun as possible for English language learners. So I did really enjoy doing that as well. And then I also picked up Shakespearean histories for the first time, because I had always sort of imagined those plays to be a bit more on the boring side, so I was really surprised at how much I enjoyed myself. I really especially enjoyed reading Richard II and Henry IV Part 1, which introduced me to Falstaff, who is like my favorite Shakespeare character now. So I had a great time reading Shakespeare this year, and I have sort of planted the seed in the back of my mind that I might potentially want to try to read all of his plays at some point in the next few years, which I never thought I'd be one to do that, but I just really ate them up this year, and I'm actually reading one right now, so I'm hoping to get in 1 or 2 more plays before the year ends. Another way I tried to shake up my reading in 2018 was to experiment a bit more with genre fiction. I am pretty pigeonholed in the literary fiction and classics world, so I've been trying to branch out into some other genres and to see what I can find there. So some new things that I tried this year. I read my first ever new adult romance. Now, this was a book that my students recommended that I read. It was called It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover, about a messed up relationship. So that was a book I would never have picked up on my own. I also tried getting into crime fiction, and I found this gem of a book, A Rage in Harlem by Chester Himes, which was ridiculous, and I loved it so much. I also read some fantasy this year, although that's not as unfamiliar a genre to me since I grew up reading a lot of fantasy, so it always feels like this nostalgic return when I go back and read some fantasy books. Some of the ones that I read this year included Stardust by Neil Gaiman, which is a very charming fairy tale for adults. And then I also read the first book in this series, The Way of Thorn and Thunder by Daniel Heath Justice. These books have the worst covers, but it's a pretty cool premise. It's this indigenous epic fantasy series that reimagines colonization in North America as this epic battle, these clash between these two forces. So they're a pretty cool series, and I do hope to continue reading more in 2019. And lastly, I read a book in the YA dystopian genre, which is one that I usually don't like at all, but I really did enjoy this book, and that was The Marrow Thieves by Cherie Demeline. This was one of the books in the Canada Reads competition this year, and we can't even bring up that topic because I got so mad about how this book was treated in the debates. But it's a really cool story about this really dark future where Indigenous people are being hunted so that their bone marrow can be harvested. So it's pretty bleak, and this book is about a band of runaways as they try to stick together and avoid capture and death. So it was a pretty cool read, and I'm glad that I gave this one a go. The last thing I wanted to talk about are two independent publishers that I started reading this year. So before 2018, I didn't pay a lot of attention to publishers or where the books that I enjoyed reading were coming from, but this year I've made more of an effort to pay attention to those kind of things, and I've been trying to get into a few indie presses where if you find one that you like, then hopefully you can trust what they put out and find new exciting books that way. So one of them that I'm really excited about is $2 Radio. It's a very small press from Ohio, and everything that they put out is just so bizarre, and it makes me so happy because it's just so in line with what I enjoy reading about. So their books are just very strange and funny and punk, so I love their aesthetic. One of the books that I loved by them this year is The Vine That Ate the South by J.D. Wilkes. Absolutely crazy romp through the South. I also really enjoyed The Incantations of Daniel Johnson, which is a graphic text that explores the life of singer-songwriter Daniel Johnson, but it is not linear and it's extremely bizarre. And then I also enjoyed this collection of essays by Hanif Abdurraqib, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us. So this press is now definitely on my radar, and I will need to go through more of their back catalog for sure. The other independent press I've been enjoying is Fitzcarraldo. They're from London, England, I believe, so it's not always very easy for me to find their books. I usually do have to ship them from overseas, but I'm just very interested in the types of works that this press is putting out. I believe that it's still overseen by just like one person, so that there is like a cohesiveness to the style of their works, and they really like to represent translated fiction and experimental fiction. This year I read two of their publications and enjoyed both of them immensely, although I have ordered quite a few more, so I do have a bit of a stockpile, so watch out 2019. But from the ones that I enjoyed this year, I read The Doll's Alphabet by Kamila Grudova, which is like a very strange and fascinating collection of short stories. And then I also read the nonfiction book The Hatred of Poetry by Ben Lerner, which is kind of exploring why poetry is so unpopular these days. And I thought that this was like a lot of fun and thought-provoking for a short read. So those are my two Fitzcarraldo books, and I really do look forward to exploring this publisher in more depth next year. So that's it for my list of my major reading trends of 2018. I would love to know if you noticed any patterns with your reading, if you discovered anything cool or tried something different with your reading. I would love to hear all about it. I think it's kind of interesting how you have this plan at the start of the year of what you want your reading to look like, and then it all sort of changes as the year goes on. We all get interested in different things and we go down these different directions. So I would love to hear if you noticed anything about your reading this year. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you again soon. Bye!